at 5:30, the battle over broker fees heats up.
Today, the city council voted to shift those hefty fees from tenants to whoever hires the broker. Supporters say this is only going to save renters thousands of dollars up front, but critics argue it's actually going to end up pushing rents up even higher.
So it's not an argument, it's a fact. Rents in this city are about to get even higher than they already are. Because if landlords have to pay brokers' fees, they're going to get that money from their tenants by jacking up rents. Plus, if rents go higher, this could lead to homelessness, as less people can now afford to live here. And that's why even the mayor agrees this could be a really bad deal for New York.
But advocates say the higher rent argument is overblown.
Rents are set by market forces, not by what landlords can charge. Who are we kidding? If your landlord could increase your rent tomorrow, they would have done so yesterday, right?
New York City was one of the last cities in the country to require that renters pay the broker fee instead of landlords. The broker fee typically equals about 10 to 15% of the yearly rent total and has to be paid up front.
This will fundamentally break the rental market. At what point is everyone here going to realize that we're only going to make things worse?
Mayor Eric Adams expressed his skepticism of the bill Tuesday, saying that he was also concerned this could lead to higher rent and affect smaller landlords.
It's just pure logic. If you hire a service, you pay for it, period.
The problem is when it's first month, security deposit, and the broker's fee, then you're talking $10,000.
But there are huge warning flags from the real estate market.
The unintended latent consequence of this is the largest rent increase in the history of the city of New York.
So the hated broker's fee will now be a thing of the past for some apartments in New York City. But what nobody's talking about is that this law won't just raise some people's rents. Once they go up, they're not going to come back down because we're in a housing crisis with only 1.4% of apartments even available to be rented. Which means every two-bit dump in this town is going to cost thousands of dollars more than it should, if you can even find one that's available. Which is why apartment brokers who understand New York's rental landscape and oftentimes have inside information on what apartments are coming up can help those who pay their obnoxious fees find something that didn't just come back on the market because the last tenants were squatters. Which can be what you wind up with when you're trying to save money, because in a housing crisis, rents go up no matter what because there just are not enough apartments available to rent. Revealing the real reason why this ban on brokers' fees won't make things more affordable for anybody in the long run. Landlords get their money from renters. And if landlords are forced to pay for more things for their renters, they'll be forced to charge more rent, which poses a huge problem. If rents go up, less people will make enough money to qualify for apartments in general. And like most progressive policies, this too is just going to push the working class out of this city even faster. And even though nobody here enjoys paying exorbitant fees to brokers to rent apartments, banning them from collecting fees, which this law intends to do, will cost jobs. But even though brokers' fees are terrible and everyone, including me, hates having to pay them, there's actually a way to get rid of these fees without anyone having to lose their job, which we'll get into. But that's not all. As you're about to see, this law could even make the tiny little apartments we already have here even smaller. I think I'm gonna leave that off. But this place, it's actually pretty good. It's a 2-bedroom apartment, $44.95 a month in rent, and it actually has a living room. A lot of places that you get for this price, they have like this tiny little hallway kitchen deal, but it does have room for a couch, which is definitely a nice feature. However, places like this, now that this new law has passed, they could get even smaller. But before we get into why that might happen, it's important to understand that this new law, it's got 180 days to go into effect, and it might not ban all brokers' fees. So some people who are in favor of this may still end up paying them.
New York City renters will no longer be forced to pay a broker fee in most cases. The Fairness in Apartment Rental Expenses Bill, otherwise known as a FAIR Act, passed with a veto-proof majority. Under this bill, landlords will now be required to pay those broker fees unless a renter hires a broker to find an apartment for them.
So this bill, it's called the Fairness in Rentals Act. And on the surface, it's going to sound pretty fair, even though people like the mayor and many industry people are very much not in favor of it and don't think it's fair. That being said, it's a major victory for the state assemblyman who was able to get this passed, but it might not end up being a victory for all renters. Because even though landlords who might need the help of a real estate agent to rent their properties and then ask the tenant to pay that agent commission, even though that might sound really unfair, the fact that landlords have to pay more things means there's only one place for them to go and get that money. On top of that, renters who hire their own broker, they are still gonna have to pay this fee. And here's the thing, the apartment we're in now, you might like it, you might not like it, but to get it into the condition you see now costs the landlords a considerable amount. Bathrooms alone cost tens of thousands of dollars, and they can be replaced more often than you might think. Some New York renters are really rough on these places. But all the costs that go into a place, like putting laundry and stuff and a new fridge and renovating it, that already gets amortized into the price of the apartment, because if you spend $20,000, you can divide that up over however many months you want to get that money back. And even though there's an argument that if landlords could raise your rent yesterday, they would have, every cost that goes into an apartment bumps up the price. So once they have a new cost to bump up the price of the apartment, it's going to get added in. And the sad thing is this is going to happen during the current housing crisis that we have, and it's going to make this city even tougher for the people who are already struggling with it. And if people cannot afford the cheapest 2-bedroom in Manhattan's Lower East Side, which this is, which has a living room, you know what's gonna happen? Something will need to be done to make this place smaller so that it costs less and so that more people can afford it, but that's not always possible physically. Especially when the current layout of a place has already kind of been set up to maximize efficiency by putting everything where it can fit and nowhere else. And since the landlord probably won't be able to find a way to make this place any smaller than it physically is, renters are gonna have to be creative, and that might mean having 2 adults in each bedroom. And instead of having a regular bed in a room that's about 80 to 90 square feet, you're gonna have 2 beds stacked on top of each other. But right now the rent on this is $44.95, and if we take that number and we divide it in half, this is the cost for each person to live here. But if you have 2 people in each room, that drops to $1,100. You'll just be living a rather minimalistic New York life, which means you won't need a lot of furniture because you won't be able to have a lot. But here's why this might be necessary.
The average cost to move into a new apartment is over $10,000.
New York City was one of the last cities in the country to require that renters pay the broker fee instead of landlords. The broker fee typically equals about 10 to 15% of the yearly rent.
So this might end up being necessary because not everybody has $10,000 to move. Regardless of how affordable you think this is or isn't, $10,000 is not something that's affordable for most people. And if you were to rent this apartment and pay a broker's fee, you're gonna need more than $10,000. 2 months of rent costs you almost $9,000. And if you pay a 10% broker's fee, which is lower than what a lot of companies say they charge, this is your all-in cost with a reduced broker's fee for this apartment. That's a lot. But the market here for renting apartments is so competitive, with so many people fighting over so little inventory. Many need a broker's help to find an apartment that fits their needs and is in the location where they want to live, revealing that even though nobody, not the tenant, certainly not the landlord, enjoy paying these fees, which are pretty high, brokers can provide a valuable service to somebody who's on limited time. Up or down, what do you think blocks more of the natural sunlight coming in? But to be honest with you, a situation where people cannot afford to move, that could have negative economic consequences for the city because people are going to be trapped. And even if they can afford to move, they might be tapped out financially and unable to avoid an emergency situation if one pops up. But even though it could be bad for the economy to have people be bankrupted when they move into a new apartment, people are already getting bankrupted by the rents they're paying anyways. And the mayor thinks that since this is going to increase rents over time, maybe not immediately when someone moves in, but over the time they spend in their apartment, people aren't actually going to be better off.
If your broker fee was $800, nothing is stopping a landlord from making that broke out into the rent payment. So instead of having a one-time $800 fee, the landlord add $80 on the bill bill per month, within the year, you're going to pay more than that.
And remember how the broker's fee for this place, $53.90? Well, if it's a 1-year lease and you divide that $53.90 over 12 months, what's going to end up happening is the rent for this place is going to cost about $5,000 a month, not $44.95. And the problem that's going to cause is now that the rent amount is higher, the landlord is going to require whoever moves in to be able to afford that level of rent. And if you move into a place and you were perfectly able to pay $5,000 a month rent when you moved in, why would the landlord lower your rent next year? And I understand the argument that if landlords could get away with raising your rent, they would, but why do we want to give them an excuse to raise people's rents? Why do we want to bump up the cost to get a new tenant to such that they have to amortize that along with all the renovation stuff you see here over the cost of whoever lives there? At least with a bathroom, you could probably predict that, hey, I'm going to get 10 years out of this bathroom. I can raise the rent by a certain amount over 10 years, but that broker's fee, it's over a year, and then you're actually paying it next year because this year you moved in and the rent was $5,000 a month. But you know who does benefit from this? Somebody who's only planning on living in an apartment for 1 year max. That person's gonna get a great benefit because they're not gonna pay a broker's fee, they're gonna have less money up front, it's gonna help them, but anybody who's like a long-term renter, they're gonna get totally screwed. And you know what's gonna happen? This is gonna raise rents for all apartments, not just apartments where the landlord has to pay the fee, because if some landlords that now have to pay fees and didn't have to before, if they now have to raise their rents, well, that's gonna make the prices of everything else in the market seem too good to be true. And as rents go up, the broker's fees that are associated with those rents are gonna go up, making brokers an easy target to once again crack down on because their fees are really high and nobody likes paying them. But if you get rid of brokers who naturally exist to solve a problem, which is to find people apartments in a competitive market, if you do that without making the market less competitive and better for tenants, you're gonna cost people jobs and rents are gonna be too high for everybody. What a disaster. You know, even though New York City real estate is kind of depressing, you've got 82,000 licensed real estate agents, some of whom make a living, a great living, helping people find where they're gonna live next. And if something changes with how those folks end up getting paid, if you force landlords to start paying them, they're gonna pay them less, and it's gonna cost jobs. Because typical fees paid by customers are around 10 to 15% of the annual rent, but landlords, when they have to pay, they only pay around 8%, which is the equivalent of 1 month's rent, almost half of a 15% fee. And look, I paid a broker's fee for my last 2 apartments. It's painful, it sucks. Nobody likes doing it, but had I not paid that fee, the apartment would have gone to somebody else, and at the time, it was the right place for me. And this is where the arguments against banning brokers' fees and giving them extra regulation really start to take shape. Because nobody forced me to pay the broker's fee for any of the places I've lived in. In fact, I didn't have to pay at all. I could have kept looking. But I chose to pay the fee because I liked the places that I ended up renting and living in, and I wanted my apartment search to be over. I didn't have unlimited time to keep looking for something that would eventually come without a fee and would fit my needs. That's what the agent did for me. They found the right place for me, they advertised it, and I ended up taking it. At the same time, the fees that I ended up paying, they weren't a mystery. It's not like I paid the application fee, the rent, and the security, and was ready to get my keys and then was told, hey, if you don't give me all these thousands of dollars right now, you can't move in. No, everybody told me what their commission rates were up front before I did anything or sent my tax returns anywhere to get approved. You have to do that here, you know. But this reveals something interesting about why New York City even has rental brokers to begin with. They don't exist because people like paying them. No, they exist because the market here is so inefficient. You need to go get your own expert if you want to find something quickly. On top of that, even if you're out there trying to do all the legwork yourself, you're still competing for the limited supply of apartments with people who are using agents. But what most people don't know is there's actually a right way to make brokers' fees disappear. It's just not the right way to do it by passing laws that ban it. And before we get into what that is, it's important to understand that brokers' fees, they haven't always existed. In fact, back in 2020, when the market here took a real dip because people were fleeing the city, you could rent any apartment in town and the landlord would happily pay the broker's fee for you. And the reason for that is because landlords were desperate. Right now, they're not desperate. And in order to fix this broker fee thing, we got to get back to a situation where landlords are once again desperate. And how do we do that? We make tenants more valuable. And the only way to do that is to build more buildings. That way, tenants have more choices, more places to spend their money. And landlords have to get more competitive to attract somebody to their apartment, especially if new ones start getting built around it. And instead of banning brokers' fees and making them illegal, the right answer here is to make them obsolete and useless. And here's how you do this. Look at this cute little building right here. Is it cute? Yeah, sure, but it's only 3 stories tall, and that's a problem because if it were higher, more people could live in it. But now people are stuck between paying insane rents for a small number of artificially restricted apartments. And that's going to leave rents with only one direction to go, which is up. And you could literally ban every single component of this industry. You could ban brokers so that there are no more brokers fees. You could even ban people having to pay a last month's rent or security deposit. That way they only move in with 1 month of rent. But that's not going to stop that 1 month of rent from going up because the supply of houses isn't getting bigger and more people keep trying to move here. But instead of changing laws so that people who want to build new houses can do so and get rewarded for it in a housing crisis, we're passing laws that maintain the status quo and just allow rich people who own buildings that are hundreds of years old to keep owning those buildings and maintaining them to a bare minimum and making thousands of dollars just because they don't have any new competition. And competition is the enemy of greed and the friend of benevolence and generosity. What do you think about that? Is that correct? Do we need more of that to bring down housing costs here, or am I wrong? Should we ban something? Is there something we can get rid of to make the housing situation better from a progressive standpoint? Let me know. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.